you have a tool like I do, it's a tool for creating this edging strip. We'll take this front tip and cut it into a somewhat pointed shape. Insert it from this side. You can steam it briefly. Simply pull this fabric out. First, manually arrange this section. Use an iron to mold it. Then we pull it out like this. As you pull this iron, come over and follow along with the pressing. Continue until the entire strip is pressed. This will be a bit easier. If you have this kind of small tool, it's quite affordable. If you don't have one, you can also buy a blanket. Once it's fully ironed like this, it looks like this. Then we need to fold it in half again. Align the two edges. Continue using the iron. This is how to do a perm and set the style. I'm not going to finish the perm right now. Let me clarify something for you. If you don't have this tool, if this tool isn't available, we weren't like this from the start, were we? Then we can only do it by hand ourselves. For instance, we first fold it along the center like this. You can also use an iron to do it like this. First, fold it. Create an impression here with the iron. Alternatively, if you don't have an iron, we can scratch it lightly with our nails. This will also create a mark in the middle. Next, we align both sides to the center line. Continue to scrape this side, then scrape this side like this as well. It's the same effect. The final effect is also like this. It just depends on whether you have the tools. If you lack the tools, just handle it manually. Let's start by discussing the straps. The strap sizes I listed in the drawing are for 2 pieces. This is the total length when combined. The width remains consistent. After finishing, we can simply cut it in half. Cut it directly based on the dimensions specified in the blueprint. Then we will crease it into 4 and iron it. After ironing, we will mark the starting position. Cut it diagonally twice as shown, because this position is quite small and hard to manipulate. So we are providing assistance with alcohol glue here. Avoid using too much alcohol glue. Just apply a little bit of glue. Only apply a bit at the start. Here we primarily assist in securing. Once applied, we fold it down by about 5 millimeters. After pinching this part, we apply some more on top. Then we fold it in half and pinch it together. Use tweezers to tuck in any exposed corners here. Stuff it in there. Arrange it by hand. Please ensure this corner is a right angle. Then we apply the same method. Handle the other end the same way. After handling both ends, we will proceed to sew. When sewing, we will start with this side of the opening. Because the starting position here is relatively thick, so we can place a piece of fabric behind the corner. I have folded this piece of fabric. The thickness of this fold and the starting position are approximately the same, is nearly level. Then sew forward from the raised fabric. When you reach the fabric of the strap itself, we need to make 2 back stitches. Then sew straight to the end and continue with back stitching. When sewing, don't we have a front side and a back side? In other words, we are stitching on the front side. Mark both ends on the front. The purpose of marking is to differentiate between the front and back. Then we turn in one direction. On the other side of the fabric, we still place the needle on the front side. Sew a visible line on the other side of the fabric as well. That is, on both sides of the strap. We are all placing the needle on the front side, because the front line and the back line are different. Generally, the front line tends to look better. We place the more attractive line on the same side. In the end, we use it as the front of our strap. This is how it looks from the front for everyone. Earlier, we mentioned the size of this strap is made up of 2 pieces combined. So after we complete the assembly, we fold it in half and cut it. Here, I'm using this buckle on the strap, the inner diameter of the buckle. It should be slightly larger than our strap size. Here, I only have this type of buckle. Its size is roughly the same as that of the strap, so it's a little tight, so I will adjust it from the other end of the strap. This means to insert it into the cut open section because this size is just right. So looking from the other end, which is the end we secured with glue earlier, it cannot fit through. That place is too thick, but after we go through it, we need to move it to the front end. In other words, we have this sutured end coming over. After moving it over, we are going inside, specifically to the back side. Fold it in by 1.5 centimeters. Then at this point, I sewed a button on the back, secure it in place. Next, let's measure another dimension from the back, the dimension taken from the back. This is the size specified on our drawing. Then cut off the 1.5 that we are folding inward, and a 5 millimeter seam allowance at the very end. For example, what I have on the drawing is, let's say it's 6 centimeters. Then that's 6 centimeters. Remove the 1.5 from the front. Then from the position where the gourd buckle is located at the front, measure back 4 centimeters. Then sew 5 millimeters back from the 4 centimeters. In total, that adds up to 6 centimeters. What is the total length in centimeters? You need to refer to the drawings. Don't take my words for granted, because each size may vary. Let's first start with making the pants. the rolled hem of the pants. We will follow the dimensions provided in the drawing for the rolled hem. Additionally, cut down the 5mm seam allowance around the edges. The side that is folded in is the back of the fabric. The side facing up is the front. After finishing the dyeing process, we can make a 5mm seam on it. Draw on the front side of the fabric. This will make it easier for us to sew later. The length of the hem here matches the length of the pant leg. We need to align it and sew it together. Be careful when sewing here. We need to work on the reverse side of this pant piece. Align the upper and lower design lines. At this point, the opening of our rolled hem is facing right. Sew straight along the line. Here I cut the rolled hem as a single length of 2 pieces. So here I trimmed off the excess parts directly along the edge. After the car is done, it looks like this. Then we need to trim this style position a little. Leave about 3mm. After trimming, you can use a sewing machine for the edges. We use the overlock machine to finish the edge at this position. If there is no overlock machine, or if there is only 3mm left on this edge, if it's difficult to finish the edge, then we will apply overlock liquid to it. You must wait for the edge sealing liquid to dry first. Only then can you proceed to the next step. After it dries completely, we will flip this part down. At this point, our technique is oriented to the left. Then we draw a clear line on it to secure it. After removing the basting stitches, we turn the fabric piece to the front side. Fold the hem up. The fold's horizontal position is where the design line is. After folding, we use steam to set the shape. Let's take a look after the pressing. This is how it looks when we finish it. Its style is essentially hidden in the hem of the pants, so we need to trim the front, otherwise this position won't hold. The position on both sides. We are outside the style line. Temporarily fix it with a few stitches. This way, the hem of the pants is done. Use the same method on the other pant piece. Let's do the hem operation of these pants. Next, let's talk about the scale strip. There are 3 options for the fabric selection of the scale strip. The one I'm using now is twill fabric. However, this twill fabric is relatively thin, so it can be used directly if a thicker fabric is used. Using the same as the backing fabric is not recommended. We can use a standard inner scale fabric, something like 60 denier, or some of the sisters have scales. It's the type of adhesive scale that can also be used, like when I do the actual stitching later. Actually, I use the adhesive scale. Here, I'm just demonstrating this cutting technique for everyone. If you use sticky scales, there's no need to cut it beforehand. But if you're using other types of fabrics, meaning fabric that isn't sticky, it is advised that you cut it beforehand. This larger outer curve here, there is no need to leave a seam. Then the upper position requires a seam. Regarding the curvature in the middle, normally leave 5mm for the seam, the position of the curvature that does not have a seam. Sisters with an overlock machine can use a sewing machine to finish the edges. If we don't have an overlock machine, we can apply overlock tape. If using adhesive tape. I left this large piece uncut beforehand. We'll trim it once we're done making it. Next, let's work on the underarm embroidery frame area. The previous instructional video has already mentioned this. This scale bar can be made from several types of fabric. For instance, you can use cotton fabric, or you can use a fabric that matches the pants. After we cut it like this directly, sewing the front sides together, following this curve, sewing along this smaller curve, I'm using a sticky scale on my side. We also face the sticky scale with its front side. It's important to pay attention to the sticky scale. One side is rough, while the other is smooth. I call the smooth side the front side. We will utilize the smooth side facing the front side of the fabric of the pants. Similarly, sew along the curve at this position. After sewing, we use the edge-cutting scissors. Make a notch around this edge. If you don't have pinking shears, just use regular scissors to make the buttonhole. Be careful not to cut the sewing thread. After you have finished trimming, we take this part of the measurement strip and turn it over to the back side of the pants. After flipping it over, the front side is clean. Then we iron this part flat. Because I'm using a sticky scale here, it is sticky. Then we will need to trim it later, so I can't iron too large of an area here. I only need to iron this horizontal fold. Just iron it. Next, we take out the wood chips, position it here, trace the line of the outer arc. Be aware that if you're using fabric that has been pre-cut, you can skip this step because it has already been prepared. Then we trim off the excess scales. We cut it off directly. After trimming, we then take this part of the scales and give it an overall ironing. One benefit of using adhesive scales is that this part can completely bond with our own fabric. Completely bond together. If using other fabrics after completion, the outer ring will be slightly warped because it hasn't been bonded. Finally, turn it to the front. Remove the marking line at this point in the circle. This is how it looks after the marking line has been removed. Then we take out the fabric pieces for the trousers. Draw the top design line and marking point. This step is performed on the front side. Here we need to temporarily secure the pleats. The direction of my arrow shows the direction of the pleats. Then we follow the direction. Take this crease next to the contouring. First, pinch it like this to align the crease. You can simply scrape it with your nails. Then we align it with this mark on the side. Next, shift the guideline to the right. Leave a seam allowance of about 1mm. Secure the collar at this point. Be mindful of the following issue when making the seam allowance here. For instance, after my machine completes the seam allowance. This part is easy. It just means to pull the fabric a little tighter to make it shorter, if it gets shorter afterwards. Then when we stitch the back and upper part together, This side may end up being a bit shorter, so we can actually use a slightly hand sewing method. Secure this side a bit at the collar, it might turn out to be more standard. Then we will use the same method. Also secure the pleats on the other side at the collar. Once both sides are cleared, we can see both of these pleats are facing outward. Once both pieces are processed the same way, we will position them facing each other. First, sew the crotch area at the front position. After sewing, we unfold this piece of fabric, direct the seam towards the left side, then sew a straight line on it. If you don't sew a straight line, please take note. You can simply separate this area to both sides. Just iron it flat. The straight stitches are pulled out. We are at its designated position. There are several button cuts in the curved areas. Then we will deal with this joining part. Here, pay attention to how this part is stitched with the previous section. The position within this design, its dimensions are consistent. Here we will align it face to face. Even the design lines are stitched directly. After removing it, we flip this part upwards. You can use an iron to press and shape it. Fold at this position. Then take out another piece of material. Fold its bottom edge inward towards the reverse side. Align the upper sections of these two stitched parts. Align this curved edge, face each other. Sew directly along the seam line. It looks like this after you flip it over. Then sew the bottom edge of the fabric on the reverse side. Sew it using the long stitch technique. Next, we align the two pieces of fabric with the right sides facing each other again. Sew the crotch area diagonally at the thicker part. Afterward, we turn the fabric to this side. Then we have sister stitching with a visible thread in the front. This step also needs to use a visible thread. Here we sew from the bottom of the crotch upward. Then its design leans directly to the left, although both the front and back pieces lean to the left, but one comes down from above. One is sewn from below. So after everything is removed in the end, its style and the top stitch. From the position of the crotch, it can be aligned. If there are no marking lines removed in the front, this step doesn't need to be removed either. Just iron it flat, then do the same on the reverse side. Make some cuts at the curved edges. Next, we need to take out the straps we prepared in advance. Here at the upper part of the back seam, there is a designated spot for placing the straps. When we later unpick the seam at this point, we will need to put the straps in. The method here is the same as that for stitching the upper part mentioned earlier. This position, where the upper part is stitched, is directly opposite this position on the pants. There will be an additional section for the design at the front and back. Then we will sew along this straight design line. After taking it off, flip it to the front side. Iron this area of the design a bit. Then take out another piece of material that is attached to the upper part. Fold the bottom edge inward towards the back. After folding, bring the front sides of these two parts together. Sew directly along the edge's seam line. Take care while sewing. We must avoid sewing into the fabric underneath the pants. Here at the start, we sew along the edge, the stitching on the back and front. One main difference is that we need to place the strap at the back. There's no need to place the strap in the front. Just go directly along the mechanism. And in this case, when our vehicle reaches the strap point, just need to stop it. The front of the strap should face up. Place it between the two layers of fabric. Then sew along the sewing machine seam. It should sew to the strap point on the other side. We will pause here. Insert the other strap using the same method. The front of the strap should also be facing up. Next, we will finish sewing the remaining parts. Here, let's discuss the two pieces we stitched together. The start and end points are aligned. Then they are sewn along the edge of the pants fabric. After sewing, attach the snap button. I'll also mention the snap button here. If it's a 6 out of 10, this position is relatively wide. Then we only need to add some clips in the curved areas. But if it's a smaller size, then this area will be a bit narrower. If it is somewhat narrower, the design at the straight line above also needs to be trimmed. Do not trim the wider sections, because if it is trimmed, this part will become softer. If it becomes too soft, from the front, it appears the position of this fabric, it will have some distortion, not straight enough. After trimming, we turn this part to the front. Organize the edges and corners and lightly press them. Then, after completing this step, we must check the straps immediately. Check for any mistakes on both sides of the straps. If there are no errors, let's move on to the next step. This spot at the bottom edge of the back, sew it together using the long needle technique. Sisters who are unfamiliar with the long needle method, you can take a look. In our tutorial folder, there is a separate video. Then I will demonstrate the process here. I won't go into specifics. So this is the place where we sew. It's the bottom edge of the joint section, and also the pant leg and the upper section. We began the sewing process. This stitch connects them together. Sisters who find hand sewing quite bothersome, you can also do it directly on the front side. Thoroughly use the fine thread to secure this position. Then finally, we will place the fabric with front sides together. Sew the bottom of the crotch area. After measuring, we are in the area next to the central position. Make some cuts. After making the cuts, turn it to the front side. Then we need to install the mushroom nails at this position. Installation method for mushroom nails. The tutorial includes separate files. Everyone can take a look. Preparation. Then let's talk about the thread. I have provided a reference value for the size of this thread on the drawing. Then we will fold it like this and iron it. On this side of the opening, we leave a 5mm seam allowance. We can draw out this seam line. This indicates the distance from this side of the fold to the style line. This is the measurement for the collar that will be visible after we complete it. First, let's discuss the issue with the previous color piece. All of these bottom edge styles should have a 1 centimeter allowance. Then, the style at the opening of the damaged piece should also have a 1 centimeter allowance. The other areas should normally leave a 5mm allowance. First, we will fold the bottom edge of the sleeve inward along the style line. You can also mark the style line for this bottom edge on the front. Folding it this way will make it more accurate. Secure the line completely on the front. This is the appearance after both sleeves are done. Next, we flip it over to the back. If there is a lot of excess fabric on this side, you can make some slight trims. An excess of 3mm of fabric is sufficient. Then we will fold the upper part at this position. Find its center point. Make a mark. Make a mark on the reverse side. After marking, set it aside for later use. Next, we take out the front and back pieces. We align them face to face at the seam and the point seam. After sewing them together, we separate the fabric at the shoulder seam to both sides. You can use an iron to press this area flat. Next, we will mark the thread at the collar position. After aligning the thread with the design line properly, we will position the opening towards the collar's style line. Then we will unpick the stitches along this line on the thread. While unpicking the stitches, we focus on this 1 centimeter at the start, specifically this 1 centimeter at the opening of the back piece below. We should avoid stretching the thread. Here, I will draw this style line. It matches the style line at this position on the back, because this area will ultimately be folded and stitched inward. If the threads on top are significantly stretched, then the top threads will shrink inward a bit. Uneven. Measured the initial centimeter of this section. Let's start stretching the threads again while stretching the threads, while following the curve to remove the seam. When retracting the seam to a position with a draft, make sure to check if the airflow separates to both sides. Withdraw until the last centimeter. Then we will loosen and smooth out this thread to complete it. Then we will flip this part of the thread to the front. At this point, its direction is to the left. Then we will draw a visible line on it, because the front area is quite thick. Initially, we can fold a piece of fabric for it, to align it with the front area. Then, after raising the waist and legs like this, then pull it forward. After the withdrawal, if you find the style in Linko to be quite thick and wide, you can also make some slight adjustments. Then let's attach the sleeves. We have marked the center point for the sleeves, especially while working on knitted fabric. It's easy for us to stretch the fabric when sewing sleeves. This might cause the sleeve to not fit properly. So we make a mark at the center point. We check this point while removing the seam. If we accidentally stretch the fabric above, it has become relatively long. At this point, you can also pull some fabric from the bottom. Ensure that the marking point on top aligns perfectly with the shoulder seam below. Then we adjust while following the curve as we remove it. After removing it, if you feel this side is too wide, it can also be trimmed. Not trimming is also fine. This depends on personal preference. Use the same method to finish the other sleeve. Then we sew the side seams, and this position of the sleeves with the front and back pieces facing each other. Sew the other side and the sleeves at the same position. After closing the seams, make a few cuts under the armpits on both sides. Then we turn the clothes to the front side. Here we need to fold the bottom edges of the front and back pieces inward along the style lines. Pull back one side. This is how it looks after the removal. Here, I removed a 5mm line from the bottom edge. Then let's handle the two side edges. The approach for the two side edges is the same. Fold inward. Next, pull back a line of 5mm, finishing the edges. After it's done, it looks like this. Next, we sew Velcro onto its back, or sew on snap fasteners. We have completed this top.
Now we will demonstrate how to do the long stitch. First, the end of the thread is tucked inside the fabric. We need to pull the needle out from inside the fabric. Aligning with this exit point, we insert the needle into another piece of fabric above. Can we see it directly from this point? This point is the same as that point. Then we enter from this side and exit this place. The distance between the entry and exit points of the needle on my side is about 3mm. It's okay if you can do it a bit more closely when you do it. Then insert the needle at the same point on the fabric below. Needle out about 3mm next door. The next step is also repetitive. It's just doing it up and down continuously. After the suturing is done, you can pull the thread tight. Directly tie a knot with the needle. Then thread this needle through the fabric. Pull it a little tighter. The end of the thread is hidden. Use this awl to pierce through the fabric. The fixed base is threaded up from behind. Then put the lid on. Gently press to secure it. This fixation is unstable. Just make a minor adjustment gently. We also need to tap it with this mold. If you don't have a mold, you can gently tap it with a hammer. Just a light tap will do. If you have a mold, try to use it. It won't deform easily. When tapping, don't hit too hard. Just give it a gentle tap. Feel that the button has snapped into place. It's fine if it feels a bit recessed. Next, we will make socks. The reason I didn't bring it up at the start is that it goes straight to the sewing position, is because if you consider the sewing position, it's simply knitted fabric. You fold it like this. It's quite short here. Using a home machine is not suitable for driving. Let's set aside a little more for it first. After the car is finished, then we'll go trim it. To create a time pattern, the stitching on the socks is more durable. We'll fold it down first. You can have a look. Let's mark these points. It is this point on the other side. This side is the front, the point on the edge of the sock. Mark it. Take a look. This is the front. Then the side we draw on is the back. Marked it. Fold it down. Along this line, where we place the needle, right here with us, the place where we draw. First, let's go back. Reverse 1 or 2 stitches, fasten it slightly, then continue sewing forward. When you reach this point, then make 1 or 2 forward stitches. You also need to do a back stitch. All right, we've reached the new point. Then make 2 back stitches. Stop. Continue walking forward. Walk to this point, then stop again. Similarly, go back 1 or 2 steps. Continue walking forward. Reach this point, then continue the previous operation. Rewind the needle. Let's take a look now. Why do I need to rewind the needle at this point? When we cut it then, it's like this, guiding everyone along this edge. Cut a little at the place where there is a seam. We have the option to rewind the needle here. We often put on and take off like this. It will be a bit more secure. This thread won't come loose either. Now that the line is finished, let's trim it a bit. Just keep it flat like this. Trim the excess stitches. Do not cut this wire. There's no problem with the 3 or 4 millimeters of this wire sticking out. If you had cut it this short from the beginning, then when it's time to give it the car, this edge isn't very good. Okay, now that we've finished cutting, fold it like this. These are all the backs. The lined areas are all the backs. In addition to making several marks on the front side, fold the socks in half along this line at the edge. Remove the stitches. After sewing, follow the edge outward. About 3 to 4 millimeters in position. Cut the socks. Places with a larger curvature need to trim the edges. Be careful not to cut the seams. Don't cut too deep. After cutting, turn the entire sock inside out. The sock is ready. Now let's take a look at this sock that has been ironed. I have pressed the design on this side. The side refers to this direction. Directly iron it here. And this is ironed on the front. It's just to sew it on the side at the back like this. And then iron it flat like this. So regarding my socks, it is located at the ankle area. It is relatively narrow. If you prefer it to be a bit wider, you can refer to our previous issue, Designs for Christmas.